Well, thank you for Camille for that wonderful introduction, and I appreciate coming here tonight. When I first talked to Camille, I was trying to get a sense of what this group is, and I really didn't get a great sense until I came here and started talking to some of you. And I realized, just like with a lot of other women in Tucson, women are really here for each other, and they do a wonderful job of being here for each other. And when I read the paper this morning, I saw something that I thought was particularly pertinent, and it was from Kathleen McCarthy. And regardless of what your politics may be, she was having some very nice words to say about women and their role in resolving this recent shutdown. And a lot of people don't know that there was a full caucus of women senators and representatives who actually engineered and orchestrated the resolution. And she was talking about how we have this old-fashioned saying of behind every great man, is an incredible woman. And she ends this article up, I thought, really fabulously. And she says, "And let it be said hereafter that behind every great woman is probably a bunch of other great women." So let's hear it. So when Camille asked me to do this, I was trying to figure out, well, what do you want? And I had to resist the urge, as I frequently do, to try to download in 60 minutes everything that I know about family law. And I realized pretty quickly that was a losing proposition. So instead, I put a good part of that in the materials that you can take home with you if you really have an idea that you want to engage with that. And instead, and I'm going to talk about some of that for sure, but then also Camille said, well, people probably want to hear about you and your perspective on the divorce process, given the fact that you've done this for so long. And I was thinking to myself, well, what could anybody really want to know about me? I'm consigned pretty much to a pretty well-disciplined life. I keep a very low profile. I don't really socialize very much. And I do all that just to stay as focused as I can be and as healthy as I can be to do what I like to do during the day, which is my work. And then I realized that I really get all the drama and intrigue that anybody could possibly ever want in life from my day job. And I realized, and I talked to lawyers about this, I feel like I am so privileged to get to do what I do. I hear some amazing stories from people who really, they trust me to hear those stories, and that's really an honor, an incredible honor to hear that. And I get to have very deep and meaningful engagement with people, toss the small talk. We're really going deep a lot of the time. And, sometimes I really get to help people, and I get to solve all kinds of problems, and occasionally I get to slay some dragons. Now, it doesn't get much better than that. Honestly, it really doesn't. They didn't prepare me for that in law school. The only trouble is, I can't talk about it. Hence my low-profile nightlife. I'm not supposed to recognize people that I have served. That's a no-no unless they say, give me permission to do that because it may let the cat out of the bag. And I don't want to be recognized, for the most part, by their spouses. So I kind of feel like I have to wear a brown paper bag over my head, kind of the equivalent of a legal burqa. And it's kind of rare for me even to do a presentation like this. Mostly I talk to judges and I talk to lawyers almost ad nauseum. And it's really refreshing to me to finally get to talk to some real people. So thank you very much for allowing me to do that. Now don't get me wrong. I get to take a lot of gulps of love from that big gulp cup. But I also take a fair share of being called every name in the legal dictionary, a lot of it starting with the letter B, and it's not always barrister. There's barracuda, I've heard. There's, of course, the classic B word. I've been called a snake. I've been called a ferret, go figure. Or that I have ice in my veins. And all of this is from people who don't even know me. So it's like I'm their imaginary enemy. And I think really you ought to get to know me a little. I do like to try to solve help you if you let me. But sometimes, and I love this Dave Barry quote, and I have to read it exactly because he says it so well with his language. He says, I can argue very well. Ask any of my remaining friends. I can win an argument on any topic against any opponent. People know this, and they steer clear of me at parties. Often as a sign of their great respect, they don't even invite me. Seriously, I've been doing this for 37 years. The last 32 have been devoted to family law. And I have a firm, 6 lawyers in my firm, and a whole bunch of other people who really help a whole lot. But from day one in law school, I was really seduced by the idea of justice. And it stayed with me when I became a lawyer. I mean, there's just nothing more magical and powerful than feeling like you could maybe have your finger on the scale of justice and weigh it one way or the other. But I was back in the day, and I'm dating myself here, where, and especially for some of you younger ones that I'm looking at, there was 5% of women in the law school the year before I went. 5%. One toilet. Translate that. The lines at the theater was really bad. In the year that I entered law school, and this was true across the board for medical school, law school across the nation, it went to 1/3. Women just deluged the whole professional school era. I mean, that was our generation that did that. And, you know, of course, there was a lot of bias going in, but we ended up with our shiny side up. I thought we did pretty well. A lot of the professors ended up realizing they liked us because we did our homework, we participated, we did all those things that women do so well. And then we were pushed out into the real world where we had to face judges and we had to face big law firm bias. You know, usually law firms didn't hire women in those days, at least not as lawyers. So as a result of that, something very good happened, and women actually went out in high-profile trial positions through public agencies, public defenders, or county attorneys, or they opened up their own law practice, and they got a whole lot of practice doing this. So the first 5 years of my practice, I spent doing everything, sweating bullets in the library at night trying to figure out 257 business transactions, you know, in criminal law and tax law and securities and all these things. I mean, it was a whole new world. But then in the 5th year, I started specializing in family law. That was after my son came, and all the calls were from people who wanted advice. My son must have been sending me a message. But anyhow, I realized in the course of doing this how powerful the divorce process really is, and what a healing process it can be. And you don't really equate healing with divorce, but we have some nods that we do, but it really does happen. And I'm going to talk about the emotional side of this at the end after I get through some nuts and bolts here. And I realized that even though, you know, kind of like the song, you know, that you want to make that person just someone that I used to know, it's a popular song on the radio, that might be the stated goal, but really I found that you could get people to dance with themselves again. And there was so much pleasure in that and so much nourishing in that. So the first thing that people ask me is, you know, and the topic of this is should I stay or should I go? But a lot of people ask me, and for some pure reason I guess, is why people split up. And so I kind of I had to think about this. In fact, you know, it kind of like, how do we go from this to this? You know, there's that saying for Nora Ephron, don't marry anyone you wouldn't want to divorce. There's another great one from Alan King. Marriage is nature's way of keeping us from fighting with strangers. So, you know, I'm not a psychologist, but I am a very eager listener of why people break up, and there's a very good reason for this. I've been married for 33 years, and I say that my husband, well, I think he's the luckiest person on the planet, and you know why? It's not because of me, but it's because of all my clients. And as I listen to people tell me why they're breaking up and complaining about their spouses, I just start to think and I think, oh my God, I do that. Oh my God, I do that. I better reform. So he gets the benefit of all my clients. But But the first thing that I think that there is, obviously, there's affairs. But usually the affair is some kind of symptom of some kind of underlying, for lack of a better word, midlife crisis. Best exemplified by this cartoon. Fred Philpott, born in 1944, let it all hang out, 67 to 79. Stuffed it all back in 1980 to 2007. People are having midlife crises, obviously, and they're sick of being stuffed back in, and they think that divorce is the answer. Well, that's one. The second one is the controlling. I've had people, this is the controlling personality. I had somebody, it was the gentleman I represented, he had been married 50 years. And he has CEO and owner of these big companies and all that, and he was a nice man. But one day his wife woke up and said, "You're too controlling." Go figure, after 50 years, she finally figured that out. But that's a second reason why people do it. The third reason, and I think that you hear this a lot, is my husband, my wife, is a narcissist. You know, there's this wonderful joke about narcissists, there's lots of them actually. But the one about why vampires don't suck the blood of narcissists. Professional courtesy. Or best exemplified by the doctor, you know, on his grave, on the tombstone is written, "Born a man, died a gastroenterologist." And so there's that, and I have to be sensitive to that personality pattern type because it will determine how I handle that particular case or try to get some insight into what's going on in the psyche of the other person. Another one just is people have just moved on, and I find that this is more generally true of women. Men, I'm being very generalistic, this is a female audience, I hope I can take some license here. But I think that men tend to settle more. And they got married, okay, and they're just switching in front of the TV. Women, they want to go out, they're here tonight, you're engaging. And it's kind of like that. I saw a cartoon in the New Yorker where it's the woman talking to a man and she's saying, "You know, Harold, I never did want to live life in the fast lane, but I at least wanted to get out of the parking lot." Or people just get permanently mad. Years of miscommunication, I think, is best exemplified by these things. Actually, the worst part of it is the pressure to communicate with him. I just know I'm going to slip up and say something I really mean. Or I'm so depressed, all my married friends have direction, they have a goal, but not me. I still don't know what I want to do with your life. Or do you have anything bigger? I think she wants to talk about our relationship. Or I wish you would quit being so hard on yourself. It leaves me with nothing to do. That'll come next. I'll give you a little titillation of what's to come. Well, hopefully this satisfies your interest about that. And it's important to me, I'm an eager listener with this, but I'm not just listening just to find out what goes on in people's lives because I don't have a life of my own. It does help me to figure out, you know, how to get inside somebody's head. So for whatever reason, people decide what happens next. And I want to spend a little bit of time talking to you about a choice of attorney, or whether or not you should have an attorney. And it gets back to the who can you trust when you don't trust anyone. And it's kind of an insider's personal view to selecting an attorney and learning to trust yourself again. And you know, there's a story about this. I think it illustrates this in spades. And that's Barbara Walters was covering for whatever gig she was with at the time. Years before the Afghan conflict, she had gone to Kabul and found these women who were walking 5 paces behind the men. Well, after, this was we've been through many iterations of this, but after the first time when the Taliban were tossed aside, she went to the same town to do a follow-up. And she found that the women were still walking 5 paces behind the men, and she couldn't believe this. And she went up to one of them and she said, "Why? You know, the Taliban's gone, this oppressive custom is gone, why are you still doing this?" And the woman looked at her straight in the eye and without blinking said, "Landmines." And it illustrates a good point. What attorney do you want walking in front of you in front of the landmine? So think about this. And you certainly don't want this kind of a lawyer. And I kid you not, This is something that actually was done outside of a singles bar. It says, "Life's short, get a divorce, call this law firm." They had to discipline these lawyers to get them to take the billboard down. Or you don't want to do this. Certainly, if you're thinking about representing yourself, divorce lawyers, you should have hired a better one. And you certainly don't want to do this on your own, in my opinion. I know I'm biased, but I don't think you should. Otherwise, you'll be like that person in the cemetery whose epitaph says, it's the last word cemetery, and it says, "I should have called an electrician." Attorneys can do beautiful things. I know I have had to engage attorneys for conflicts. And what they allow you to do is to just park your troubles at the door, leave them within, and allow you to get on with your life. And I think the attorney can become your voice in a divorce case. There's a communication circuit that has set up, particularly in with husbands and wives, that isn't necessarily true with civil cases. And you develop a pattern of communication over the years. And if you carry that pattern of communication into your divorce, you're going to carry those same problems forward and have the same difficulties getting divorced. And I think what happens is the lawyer serves as sort of a circuit breaker. So that I then step in, if it's me, I'm stepping in front of you, and that person, he can't push my buttons, and I'm going to say he. I'm a professional communicator, and I don't have history. And so I find that if you just kind of let the attorney be your voice for you, it breaks that pattern. Now, I always tell my clients, understand this. If you have a particularly controlling spouse, they don't want the attorney to get between you and them. They want to go behind, and they do everything they can to undermine your attorney, calling them the B word. They're just going to take your money. You're never going to get a better deal. So I warn people, that's what's going to happen, because it inevitably does, and then they get a big chuckle out of it when it happens. And it's much better not to let that happen. You want to think about, I do triathlon, and I always hear when I have to go up this big hill, and, can I do it? And I hear the coach in my head, push, pull, push, pull, push, pull. And so you have to be thinking, what person would you want to have be that voice in your ear? So what are you looking for? First of all, and foremost, I think, is competence. Everyone wants to park by the brightest light in the parking lot, right? You're all going for competence, particularly if you have a complex case. There are some referral organizations that I have in the materials. The American Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers has a site wherever you are in the country or even in the world. They can give you the profile of different lawyers, and they've passed really highly specialized peer review. There's family law specialists in Arizona, and that's available at the State Bar site. But then sometimes you don't need all that much firepower, and there's lots of other lawyers who don't qualify under those headings who are also very good. But I think these are the obvious signs of what you want to look for competency. First of all, look for a busy lawyer. That's sort of a no-brainer. And that lawyer can't just be you can't be their only client. You have to understand that they're busy for a reason, and they're out there all the time getting more and more experience, and that can help you. And then I'm going to give you a secret question that will help you determine whether or not your lawyer is competent. And I can give you this question because I don't think any of you are trying to be legal specialists here in divorce law. And I am on the board of legal specialization, and I do exam questions. And I know who doesn't get what. Most lawyers, and you think this is elementary, know what makes spousal maintenance deductible. It gets flunked 90% of the time. So it's a sure sign of competence. I ask that of every associate I want to hire to see whether or not they have a basic level. So the second thing is that I think people should look for is chemistry. Beyond competence, there is chemistry. And I think it's very important in divorce cases to have at least some chemistry. Somebody who shares your values in some way. And you're not going to get married to this person, but you are going to have a very special bond with them for about 6 months to the next year. And when I do seminars with lawyers, I like to tell them, you need to engage. People think what I do is very stressful. I can assure you, yeah, it is challenging and it's somewhat stressful, but it's not really. Because if you engage, if you park those bubbles over your head that, kind of like the cartoon, as you're talking to the person, you're saying, oh, that's, a very reasonable thing you're saying, this is so-and-so, and really you're saying this person is a lunatic. You can't do that. If you can park that and stop interrupting yourself and don't allow any interruptions to occur, there's something that's very magical that occurs. There's an energy circuit that starts to happen. And I think a lot of good things flow from that. First of all, you don't get tired. Secondly, you get it. I think one of the most beautiful things is hearing people's stories. And if you can get those details and really concentrate, you get it. And so people don't have to call you all the time reminding you 6 different times, which is what drives lawyers crazy when you call and it runs up your bill. So see whether or not you're engaging with that person or they're engaging with you. And there's a happy side effect. Both the lawyers and clients in that, all that brain juice, the BDNF they talk about, that's the neural brain factor that keeps you from getting Alzheimer's and keeps you young. When you engage deeply, without interruption, and do things of the nature of the work that we do, you get that in spades. And so it's great anti-aging protection, go figure. You get a lot of soul food from it. So beyond chemistry, I'm going to talk about the salesman. You want to stay away from the salesman. There are lawyers out there who promise too much, who will tell you, oh, you're going to get $20,000 a month in spousal maintenance for the next 50 years. I mean, I heard my clients tell me that other people have told them that. You have to know this. There are no spousal maintenance guidelines in Arizona. There were some in Phoenix, but then they died of natural causes. Everybody kind of danced on its grave, saying, ding dong, the witch is dead. Sometimes I wish we had them back. But there aren't even rules of thumb. People say, oh, I'll get it for half the marriage. No. Or I'll get half the income, or a third of the income. No. You need to know the real underbelly of the lay of the land. We used to have a very stable bench consisting of lawyers who actually practiced in the area of domestic relations. And they stayed on the bench for a long time. So we would have some consistency, and we as lawyers could predict a lot better than what we can now. That changed about 5 years ago. And this whole influx, all the old ones, in fact, the oldest one from the old bench is now retiring next year. But it's all, a lot of criminal judges are coming on, people from juvenile court, civil judges who've never heard a divorce case in their life. And people come in all the time and they want us to be able to tell them how much. People ask me that question 20 different ways to Friday. I can't tell you. There are factors for spousal maintenance, which I put in your materials, but there's no amount that you can predict. So if somebody tells you that they can, walk away, run. And also, in combination with that salesman, please understand that I think an attorney needs to manage your expectations somewhat. So you're looking for that. Regardless of what the attorney promises, attorneys cannot just pull the rabbit out of the hat. We can't just manufacture money. We can't manufacture solutions to every problem. And I think sometimes people sort of expect this. Well, don't just stand there and negotiate. The impossible. You're going to get eaten alive there. The better thing is run, don't negotiate. You can run up the wall. So the next thing I want to talk about are the fee situation. A lot of people are afraid of lawyers because of fees. And there are lawyers who are the kind who are tick-tock, tick-tock. And then there are lawyers who are tick-tock, 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 tick-tock. Which one would you rather have? And in that regard, I urge you not to let the hourly rate be your metric. When I was a very young lawyer, I charged $25 an hour. And that was for a reason. I didn't know as much, and it's not so much as how long it takes you to turn the screw once you figure out where the screw is. It's how long does it take you to find the screw? And that's where experience comes into play and a higher rate. And so I have a series of questions, and I put these in your materials, of things that you should ask your lawyer, because you really want your lawyer to be, as responsive as you can. Do they bundle emails, for example? Or is the lawyer charging you 0.1 for every three lines that you send to them? People sometimes they'll email me 50 times a day. well, I put 50 emails and I figure out the reasonable time, even though technically I could charge, you know, 0.1 for each email. But you want to find out what their policy is about that. Or do they have minimum charges? Do they have coverage while they're gone? Attorneys who can help you? Or are you on the lurch when they're off in Bali for a 2-week vacation? Do they have a system for ready transfer of knowledge about your case so that if somebody is going to take over, they know immediately what's going on? I have a system in my office where it's kind of like doctor's progress notes, and you can tell right away what's happening in the case. And does the attorney have confidence in that person? Do they handle the same document twice? What's their system? That tells you a lot about their efficiency. Do they bill for clerical work? How do they distinguish clerical work from paralegal work? Are they open to letting you do the legwork? Are they giving you useful materials like at this seminar? Are they going to give you homework or action lists after meetings and then follow up with you about that? Do they follow up? Do they use the word tickle a lot? Are there ways that they can tell you keeping your fees down? And do you get the feeling that they'll even know who you are when you call? So those are the kinds of things. I have a lot more in the materials about that. Other questions that I would ask for are about their security. You know, what are their security policies? You know, nowadays we all know nothing's safe from the government. We know that. We know that probably nothing's safe from your spouse if they really want to intentionally spy on you, or identity thieves. Now, my thing is, though, I think that maybe you have to surrender to the government, but not to the rest without a fight. You know, there's the joke going around about the NSA guy going into the bar, and the bartender says, "You want to hear a joke?" And the NSA guy says, "No, I already know what you're going to say." So the Snowden disclosure has certainly kept a lot of people scrambling for some kind of security cover, but the security pickings are skimpier than a bikini and a Victoria's Secret model. Now, I have an advantage. I sleep with our IT coordinator. He's my husband. And I know what to ask, and I know what the standards are. And he drives himself nuts at night because he's thinking about all the Russians and the Chinese and the spouses who can get into our policy, into our walls. Ask about their firewalls and what security measures they have. Ask about their confidentiality policies. Those are the best tips that I can give you for that. Yes?
You said, when you asked, do they use the word tickle?
Tickle meaning calendar? Not yet. Right. Calendaring, I constantly, every time I send anything out, I tickle it on my calendar, to-do thing, but it's everything. And my staff is totally obsessed with tickling, and I have to see it. I use a second pair of eyes in my office, so I make them use the word T on the transmittal so I can see that they actually tickled it. So every day, you know, there's all these things that have to be followed up with, and we don't let it go.
It's a good phrase, not a bad phrase.
No, that's a good phrase. They tickle, right, yes. Right, tickling you. And actually, there was this funny cartoon about lawyers' fees with this. And the woman says, "So what's the deal? I thought you and Rupert were getting a divorce." And she says, "Nah, we checked the price of a lawyer and decided to buy separate houses instead." We'll talk about seizing control of the process and its twin sister. It's all in the timing. And you know there's that old song, "There's 50 ways to leave your lover." Well, there's not exactly 50 ways in the divorce process, but you do have options, and you have lots of options. For example, legal separation, dissolution, postnuptial agreements, collaborative, mediation, going straight to court, doing nothing at all. And of course, if you have a prenuptial agreement, it's a lot easier to get through the process. In fact, in Arizona, they're bulletproof if they're properly done, but likely this is not bulletproof. I don't have the foggiest idea how to draw a prenuptial agreement. Here, just whack her with this. It's the old-fashioned way. Okay, so there's divorce, and I'm going to give you the 60-second version of divorce in Arizona. It's no fault, so petitions look very vanilla. However, compliments of our legislature who can't keep their mitts off of family law, you still have to fill out a ton of paperwork. Only a couple mean anything. As soon as you serve the paperwork, there's a preliminary injunction that goes in effect for the other party. Don't dissipate any of the community assets. Don't harass me. Keep everybody on insurance. And don't take the children out of state without a court order. Then you get it served, and you can either serve nicely and give them 10 days to do whatever it is they're going to do, or you send the man with the badge and you get them served. That establishes data service, and I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes, why data service is important. The community is terminated as of that date. You then, in my book, have 3 options. You can settle immediately and get divorced in 60 days. You may not know everything. You can settle later after exchange of every last ounce of information and maybe get divorced in 6 months. You can slug it out and cast your fate to a stranger in a black dress and a gavel. That'll take about a year. Or you can give up. You could also do a legal separation, and the process is exactly the same. The reason that people, except you're not divorced. And there's 4 reasons why people elect legal separation over divorce. One is if there's medical insurance, not such a big deal, maybe, anymore with this new Affordable Care Act. Second is religious. The third is Social Security benefits. You have to be married 10 years or more to get the higher of either your benefit or half of your spouse's benefit, which does not cut their benefit. And sometimes what I call is a soft landing. It sounds easier. Sometimes people don't want to do the whole, jump in the deep end of the pool. They'd rather do a soft landing. You can always change it later to a divorce as long as you don't have your decree. There's also something called a postnuptial agreement, when you don't really want to call it quits, but you want to have some rules of the road. You can do that. However, understand it's not a court order at that point, and it's subject to being set aside, and the judge gets the final say-so on fairness. Mediation. Everybody asks, mediation. Well, my husband and my wife just wants to go to mediation. Well, that's a very nice thing to do, and lawyers always do mediation. We're mandated to do that. But be very aware, if you are not the person in financial control or power, to just go into mediation, because there is not a level playing field. Usually when we think of mediation, it's after everybody has everything they need to know, and then you can do mediation with your lawyer. But if you do decide to get mediation without lawyers, at least get some advice on the side as you're going along. There's collaborative law, which is a subject for another day. And of course, you can just surrender to misery and do nothing. And people ask you, and I'll get to your question here, is it better to be a petitioner or respondent? It doesn't matter unless you're the 3% of cases that go to trial, in which case you get the first and the last word. Yeah?
So in Arizona, isn't it that don't the judges have to order you counseling or something first before you?
Yes, you have the right to have a judge order your spouse into counseling for 1 session, and that's it. And if you have to actually order them in like that, you probably are not going to do any good.
And like they say will pay for it?
Yeah, it's all free. And there's free services for court conciliation. I have that number in your material. So I think timing is everything. When I told you when it's served, the community is terminated, for better or for worse. Income stops. Community income stops. So to the extent you're accumulating assets, you're no longer doing that. There might be a support duty, but you're not entitled to 50-50 of that income. The flip side of that is obligations also terminate. So if you have a scofflaw for a spouse, somebody who's an alcoholic, somebody who's out there, dibbling in debt, or doing gambling in Las Vegas or whatever, then you want to make sure the community is terminated sooner rather than later. Now the timing. One reason that you might want to wait is while you're in the house, you might have more access to information. And you may not get another chance. Although for the life of me, I don't know how people can just stay in the house when they are secretly contemplating divorce. How do you appear normal? I don't know.
Probably not normal.
It's not normal. It's not normal anyhow, right? And you want to have a long enough marriage, if you can hang out that long, to qualify for spousal maintenance. Or there may become vesting interests like RAD Limited as this wonderful full-time, lifetime pension plan in the form of radiology machine benefits that you get. They vest after 5 years. If you leave before the 5 years, you can have a lot of trouble. So if you're the spouse of one, you want to make sure that that gets vested. While you are waiting, beware the snoop, particularly if you have a controlling spouse. He or she should be all but decked out in burglar's garb. GPS devices, cell phones, bugging, recording. It happens all the time. I used to have talks with clients about, sexually transmitted diseases. No more. It's all about cyber diseases. Even if you have built in a secret password and changed it, it will not help you because of software, keystroke monitoring software. And I put some tips on how to go about, debunking that in your materials. So build in some backdoors for yourself. Get a cape in the form of detection software, or even buy a separate computer. Take care of business. Get your mouth full of gold. There's no value to that in a divorce. Do you need some facial work or some body work? Now, I actually had a guy who wanted to value his wife's breast implants. He actually made the claim in court. I think the lawyer was too embarrassed to finish with that. But get your car fixed. Do all those things that don't really have any value. Buy some smashing dresses. Or, build a little nest egg if you need to. Get out and figure out what education you might need. Get some credit. Get some access to funds in an account. The corollary to this is hiding the family jewels. What happens when your spouse is the family jewels thief and you have to play detective? Well, a lot of people who do this lie to themselves, and they act as if they aren't really lying, although you kind of figure they are. They're good at maintaining a facade, somewhat like Lance Armstrong, who convinced himself that he really wasn't cheating, even after admitting he was cheating. There's this local curmudgeon, Dale Dawson, who has this to say about that. And he's really good, and I have to just get this directly. On gray truths, what is far more useful than lying is the ability to believe what one wants to believe. It's called a gray truth. The real challenge is not separating truth from lies, but having multiple truths to choose from. So put your Google glasses on, do your computer searches. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit that you can get with computer searches, people map searches, cyber investigators. A lot of times people will be putting things in LLCs that they then get to control. You can do a corporation computer search for that. Look at tax returns and account statements. They reveal a whole lot. Once you are getting divorced, there's the power of the subpoena. And a lot of information is really readily available to you on Facebook. They say, since 2004, it's saved thousands of hours of criminal investigation man-hours, just because you would be amazed at how phenomenally ridiculous people get, and they just blather with diarrhea of the mouth on Facebook. So, now I'm going to get to division of property. This is the skinny. Arizona is a community property state. It means it's equal. If you brought in property into the marriage, it still stays separate, but the community might have an interest in the growth of that, depending upon whether or not there's been compensation and a lot of other factors. That's a more complicated question. But people about property, they have lots of fantasies that they're going to get the lion's share of the property, or they just really want to screw their spouse and get a lot more property. And it's kind of like, these are fantasies. It's great to indulge in them. Here's a few good ones. Here's another one. This is the woman. This is the women being single woman. This is the married woman. I know this is not PC. And this is the divorced woman. Now let's check out her husband. He's single. Married. Divorced. And there are some people who would like to do this. Nice purse. Thanks, it's my ex-husband. They're alligators. And even though the narcissist spouse would like you to believe that they're more valuable to you than you, they went out and they did the work, and all you did was stay home all day long, raise kids, and take care of everything else in the whole wide world. There was actually a man in New York, in the case of Silverman versus Silverman, who tried to introduce psychological assessments of his personality and innate intellectual talents as evidence of his superior contributions to the marriage, to reduce the wife's share of the property, and to prove that their assets were due to what economists call, and I'm quoting from this, human capital, that the husband attributed to his self-described superior psychology. Now, this actually went up in a Court of Appeals case in New York. Of course, the trial court said was having none of it and didn't allow the expert witness to testify. I thought, well, you know, what witness would testify about that? His mother? So, understand though, this is a good thing to walk away from this point, is that value is in the eye of the beholder. And a lot of your things are a lot more valuable to you than to the other side. It pays to be flexible. If you can let go, oh, you're going to put a $500,000 value on my shoe, you can take my shoe for $500. But it's kind of like this. This is your house, as seen by yourself, as seen by your buyer, as seen by your lender, as seen by your appraiser, and as seen by your county assessor. So everybody has a different point of view. If you can stay flexible, you're well beyond it. Now, we touched a little bit about spousal maintenance, so I won't go over that. I am going to give you a little example, though, of what I meant by it's all over the lot. I do teach at judicial conferences, and years ago, I wrote a handbook for judges on spousal maintenance. And I was going in there with all of my charts and everything and saying, well, this is kind of how we do spousal maintenance, how we figure it out. We lawyers have it figured out, even if you don't. And at the end of this one example, there were 70 judges in the room, and they came up with anything from zero spousal maintenance to $4,000 a month for life. And at that point, the light bulb clicked, and I realized this is total discretion. Settle as much as you can. Next thing people want to know is equal parenting time, the law of the land. You might have heard some of this on the press. There is a huge father's rights movement that has made huge changes in Arizona family law in the last 10 years. Starting with getting more time with the children, which is fine, but a lot of it was they were trying to reduce child support. And if you have equal parenting time in Arizona, the child support is almost minuscule. I mean, it is savage. You know, we had some women, the man, I mean, he was heir of $13 million, and he had at least $400,000 a year and would have a whole lot more. She had nothing, $500 a month in child support. It was awful. You know, but equal parenting time is not the law of the land. They have enlarged it, and some judges have drunk the Kool-Aid and think it's automatically equal. But it is not. It's maximize parenting time to the extent that you can. The best interest of the child still reigns, and I have the statutes actually there in your book. Now for child support, and I'm almost done with this part before we talk about the emotional part of it, which will just take a few more minutes. You know, Dave Barry, he's great. He would say, Mother Nature, in her infinite wisdom, has instilled within us, each one of us, a powerful urge to reproduce. And this is her way of assuring that the human race, come what may, will never have any disposable income. Child support is governed by guidelines, but the problem is the guidelines are dependent upon how much spousal maintenance you get, and the court can always do a deviation upward or downward depending upon your lifestyle, and that deviation is also very discretionary. So you've made a deal. What are the 10 biggest mistakes in negotiating and tying up an agreement? Because of the time factor, I'm not going to go through all those, but I do have them in your materials about 10 big things that you ought to look for when you're tying up an agreement. You know, the deal is one thing, but I find the devil really is in the details so that you don't stay married to that person in a worse way than you ever were after it's over with. So, the deep end of the pool is managing the emotional side of divorce until you learn to trust yourself again. And I like to think about, I would tell people actually, that I see, we all do, we become our disguise. And if you're in a dysfunctional relationship, or even any kind of relationship, you're going to be making compromises. And so over the years, you know, if it's dysfunctional, those aren't necessarily good for you. And you gradually get a little more contorted, and it has a torque of its own. And you really do become your disguise. In some of our relationships, you feel belittled, and you don't even know it. It's kind of like the frog in the boiling pot. You can feel diminished to the point that you feel like you have nothing of value to offer, or you're being told by that lying sack of you-know-what spouse of yours that everything is your imagination. And so you quit trusting yourself. You know an affair is going on, you know that person is hiding money, and then you're being told, no, you're just crazy. I hear that so often. And I really do think that that's the biggest crime. It's not the affair, it's not all that. It's that you lose trust in yourself. And along the way, you become addicted to staying in that relationship because you don't know that you have any self-worth. And so there are strategies to manage this. You know, everybody knows about the divorce diet. It's a great way to lose weight. 20 pounds is the average when you're getting divorced. I don't recommend you get divorced for that, but it's one of the side effects. I urge people to stay fit as much as you possibly can. I'm a huge proponent of it. It really helps me. And somehow I think that yoga, whatever it is that you do, it helps people a whole lot. Do things that you never could do before. But more important than that is I think you need to be aware of the divorce brain. There is when people who have been controlled and belittled and they're finally free and they realize, oh, I have a lawyer and you're going to handle everything and now, woohoo, you know, every hurt I ever have, I'm going to, you know, take out in the divorce. I think what happens is there's a whole angry side that comes out. And what happens to the angry person, the person who acts out? Nobody ever sees the person pushing their buttons. That person is charming. You know, and I'm sure you're all not, you know, people here nodding their heads about that. No one ever sees that. All they see is that you're acting out and you're angry and you're just emotional and you're just being ridiculous. So I try to help people not to do those things. Instead, fantasize about it. For example, you could be left with this picture. This is a billboard. Hi, Stephen. Do I have your attention now? I know all about her. You dirty, sneaky, immoral, unfaithful, poorly endowed slimeball. Everything's caught on tape. Your soon-to-be ex-wife. P.S. I paid for this billboard from our joint bank account. Or you can fantasize. Actually, this one is a really great one. It's an obituary, and I did read obituary. It's part of my other life. It's about William Boyd Parker. It came out about 6 months ago. Handsome devil. And I read this long obituary. And I started reading and I think, oh my God, what are they saying in this obituary? And this is part of it. It was also here, this was in Pine Top or something, that he met the love of his life and wife for the better part of 40 years. They had amazing adventures together and lived together fully in each other's arms. Their life, however, was not without tumult. Bill, being tall, handsome, and charming, had a lifelong weakness for beautiful women. He was married 3 times, all 3 ended by infidelities. And then they got divorced, and he moved to Tucson. They finally reconciled, so they could be close to the children, blah, blah, and never left each other's side again. But she wanted it to be mentioned here that despite her husband's womanizing ways, she never stopped loving him. So you could wait and get revenge from the grave. Or you can learn the art of the tone. In the art of the tone, my husband likes to say he's a wonderful person, you know, but he's type B to my type A personality, as you might guess. He likes to do discussions with me, and I go back and forth, but one day I heard him say, how come you always have to debate with me? And I said, what do you mean debate with you? I just respond to your point, and then you respond to me. How come you're not debating with me? And he said, well, I'm just giving you supplemental information. And I said, how is that different? And he stopped and he thought about it and he said, it's all in the tone. And it is all in the tone. So learn how to behave. Have all your fantasies, talk to your girlfriends, but when it comes time to be charming, you be charming. So this is how I think it kind of goes. In the first few months, and I'm going to leave you with this last word. I'd like to tell people the first few months of separation, especially from a very controlling person, somebody who's been abusive to you emotionally, is very painful. First few months. If you have complete separation over those first few months, you gradually start doing what you did, and you start to know yourself again. And I see people emerge and start getting happier and happier and happier. And the good news is it generally doesn't take more than 6 months. And that's a wonderful thing to have happen. And I like to tell people, think of me as your hiking guide. I'm up here, and all you can see is that you're going over the cliff. but I can see that you're going around. And it's really true. So, this is what I think you feel like walking in to all these alligators. You just ejected from the plane and you think you're safe, and there's these alligators. And you really can go to thriving. You know, I hear a lot, I will survive, but you really will thrive. You're going to start dancing with yourself once you make it to the other side. It's not just a mirage. In fact, I think this is a great picture for that. So one of my clients sent me a very pithy verse, and I think it's real good to share. To one who waits, all things reveal themselves, as long as you have the courage not to deny in the darkness what you have seen in the light. So I'm going to leave you with one story, and that's about courage, and it's about a Minnesota State Trooper who stops like this 80-year-old woman who's speeding on the highway. And he stops her and he asks for a license and registration, and she takes it out, and the officer sees she has a concealed weapon permit. And he says to her, well, you have a concealed weapon permit, do you have a weapon? And she reaches in her glove box and says, yes, officer, you know, here it is, and pulls out some Glock or whatever.
Some not.
Yeah, some Glock, I don't know what they are. That's my husband's department. But something in her body language and the way that she said it made him ask another question. Do you have any other firearms? And she also admitted to having a 9mm Glock in her center console. And so then he decided, well, I better ask her, do you have anything more? And she said, well, I just have one more, officer. I have a 38 special in my purse. And then he says, lady, what are you so afraid of? And she says, not Dan's name. So hopefully some of this knowledge will get you to the point of dropping from alligators to this and feeling like you can have some courage about it and not be so afraid.